What began as an uneventful day in January of 1998 became a day that I will never forget. And it all began with a whisper. My eldest daughter leaned to my ear, and the only word that I heard was raped. She was telling me that her little sister had been raped. Not my daughter, the little optimist cheerleader with a sparkle in her eyes and a spring in her step. Not that softball player who was still so conscientious that she picked the biggest helmet so not to mess up her hair. We were definitely not prepared for everything that began to happen in the next 2.5 years, which was the length of the court process. Grave changes began to take place, and our little girl was lost forever. She never again cheered. She didn't play softball. And the dolls were never looked at in quite the same way. Her very innocence was robbed from her, and she replaced it with fear, distrust, depression, and doubt. And although she has grown into a beautiful young woman with a daughter of her own, there are days when I still know that she grieves the little girl that she once was. During the longevity of the trial, we learned a great deal about the process and what was lacking, and that one piece that was lacking the most was the support of a child advocacy center.
Hello, my name is Sherry Reinhardt, and we're at the Lincoln County Child Advocacy Center. The Child Advocacy Center was started in a response to cases of child abuse who were increasing in numbers in our community, and the prosecution rate was about 30% when we opened, and we realized that we needed to have a coordinated response to child abuse allegations. That sometimes when a child made a report or family of abuse, that unfortunately the hurt just began because the process was very unkind to children.
When I first started, I was actually a CPS investigator, and when we were doing investigations during that time frame, we typically would get a report. We would go and interview children. We would refer it to law enforcement. They would interview children. We would then send it to the DA's office, and they would interview these children again.
I can remember bringing a child in, and they're meeting us at the police department. And you and I may not think much about that, but if you can imagine as a child coming into a police department, it's a cold environment. You're walking in, you're met by some big guy wearing a gun and a badge, and now all of a sudden he wants to take you into a room and ask you a bunch of questions about the traumatic experience that you've been through either recently or maybe it's even been for years. And if you can imagine for that child how traumatic it is, and I'm sitting there a lot of the time doing these interviews and I'm thinking, wow, I'm causing more trauma to this child by asking them these questions and having them relive this all over again. And they're not going to stop at me. They're going to go next and they're going to talk to someone else. Maybe it's social services. Maybe they're going to go talk to another psychologist. They're going to convey this story over and over again. And having to do that causes so much more harm to the child.
We always knew that all these multiple interviews were tremendously traumatic for children because they were having to tell some of the worst things that they had ever lived through in their lives to multiple people. And then once the trial started, they were having to tell it again and again and relive it and relive it and relive it.
Before the Child Advocacy Center opened, agencies who are responsible for investigating child abuse, which is law enforcement, social services, the prosecution, medical professionals, each one did their own separate investigation because each has a role to fulfill and standards to go by. And a lot of times there was not collaboration, which made the child have to be experiencing the very same interviews, same services, same questions over and over again. Child abuse is a system where all these people have to come together in order to prosecute and provide care for a child. So each one has an agenda and standards that they have to adhere to. A Child Advocacy Center brings all of those entities and agencies to a table for a multidisciplinary team approach to investigation, which affords the victims the opportunity to be seen in a home setting atmosphere full of toys and games and be interviewed by a professionally trained forensic interviewer. And those entities responsible for investigating child abuse come together collaboratively around the table to watch the child being interviewed one time.
Anytime that our department receives a report of abuse, we contact the Child Advocacy Center to set up an interview that our department is able to observe from another room with law enforcement. Through that interview, we're able to observe the child's body language while the child is being interviewed by a forensic interviewer. We're also able to feed questions to the interviewer to ask the child.
The reason we do a forensic interview at a Child Advocacy Center is because it's a neutral, safe environment for that child. They feel comfortable here. It's a house. First thing the kids see when they walk in is stuffed animals and toys and a couch, and they get to sit down and watch TV, and they just feel more comfortable here. What I explain to the kids is I'm just the person that's going to talk to you today. I tell them that this is a really safe place and that they can talk to me about anything that they want. I don't have a badge or a gun. I'm not a police officer. I'm not with Department of Social Services. All those organizations are great and we love having them at the table, but the kids are able to talk to me as a neutral person.
What is unfortunate about a lot of these cases is that there's not a lot of evidence. In most child abuse cases, I think probably 85 or 90% of the cases, there's no physical evidence of abuse, particularly in sex abuse cases. It's very, very rare to have that. So what you have is the word of a child. Once the report is filed, a child does the initial interview with the Child Advocacy Center. It's crucial because the jurors get to see the demeanor of the child closer to when the time actually happened, when the time the report was made. A lot of these cases aren't tried for a year and a half, 2 years, sometimes 2.5 years before we get to them. The child is much different. They're much older. A perfect example is a statutory rape where you'll have a child who files a report when they're 14. We may not get to the case until they're 16 and a half or 17. So the child now looks like an adult. It's much more difficult to try a case the older that this child looks. Well, whereas here, we have this interview of a 14-year-old or a 13-and-a-half-year-old where they're still very much childlike, and the jurors get to see that. They get to see the child closer to the time. They get to see more of the raw reaction. Whereas years ago, when we didn't have the Advocacy Center, we didn't have that. It creates the environment where the children are free to open up, to give details, and then help us prosecute all of these individuals. And it's all of those details that verify and validate what the child says. It's what gives the child more credibility. It's what helps us prosecute the case, because again, that's typically all that we have. So when you put this child on the stand and they give their story, to go along with the story, corroborate that story, we then have details about that particular defendant, details about their room, details about where things took place that you don't have at the beginning, but that are absolutely necessary to prosecute the case. And that's the value of the Advocacy Center, is learning all of that information.
When the Child Advocacy Center opened in 2007, the prosecution rates here in Lincoln County were right at 30%. And that being because many times the process is very tedious. It was so traumatic for families that they began the process but were not able to finish. Now, with the Child Advocacy Center being open 6 years, the prosecution rate here in Lincoln County is at 98% with one hung jury in a case. So for our community, seeing that perpetrators are put away costs us less money. Children are being taken care of in a less traumatic, stressful way, receiving mental health services, medical examinations, and making sure that the family unit is on board through the entire process.
There can be lots of consequences for children telling about sexual abuse or other traumas, and lots of consequences sometimes through the experiences they have in court and other type of things. And that's why having the support of the CAC and through therapy is so important for children and families to help them know how to navigate those systems and to give them the support that they need until they feel empowered.
I think one of the most important things that we have with the Sheriff's Office is been able to use the CAC, which is one of the 24 accredited agencies in North Carolina, that we were able to completely start at the beginning of the case and go all the way through the court system where the perpetrator is sent to prison. Our youngest case would be 9 months old. Child has been sexually assaulted. That affects that child for the rest of its life. The help that we get through the CAC, through the counseling, the interviews, and just being able to share our case with them and get input helps a lot on getting the end of the case completed. Our sheriff is 100% for the CAC and backs us with anything we need for child investigations. We're blessed to have the ability to have several officers just dedicated to child abuse and sexual assaults. We have 2 full-time detectives and several others that help at any time needed.
I work hand in hand with the CAC. They're a great organization, much needed in this community. They're all wonderful. They provide a lot of services for the children outside of just the investigation part. Not only am I a detective, I'm also a parent of 2 small children. If anything were to happen, I'd feel 100% certain that they would take care of them just like they have every other child they've experienced.
Every 33 seconds in America, a report of child abuse is made. 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys will be sexually abused before their 18th birthday. In the last 10 years, more children have died on American soil at the hands of someone that they know and love, more than the number of soldiers that have died fighting for our freedom in Iraq and Iran. 24% of the population in Lincoln County is 18 or under. In 2012, there were 1,775 children reported as abused and neglected in our community, which estimates to about 10% of our youth population. Child abuse and neglect has a devastating impact on the life of a child. It goes beyond incredible physical and emotional pain that is inflicted upon them. And most often these children suffer from developmental delays and behavioral problems that last a lifetime, ultimately due to the cost of public entities such as our health care, human services, education, and our juvenile justice systems. Abuse and neglect not only just impact the child and the family, but our community as well. The case for prevention is persuasive. Not only is the Child Advocacy Center a humane approach to child abuse, it's the financially responsible approach.
With the hundreds and hundreds of child abuse cases that come through Lincoln County every year, and all the children that are seen here, it is very important that we maintain and continue this move forward in keeping our kids safe.
The value the Child Advocacy Center has, particularly for our office and for our county and state and protecting our families, is difficult to put a price on. We couldn't do it without them. Their office and the services they provide is absolutely necessary in our job in protecting our community. It makes prosecuting extremely difficult cases just a little bit easier, and it would be very, very tough to do without them.
I think about all the years that we did do it the other way because we had no choice, and how traumatic that was for those children.
It is so important to all of our children who fall victim that we have the type of support that children receive in a Child Advocacy Center. We now know that had we had one to rely on, my daughter would have not undergone the multiple interviews that it took each time there was a change in the district attorney's office or a change in the staff at the investigator's office. She would have gone without reliving her case each and every time that she had to retell her story.
If I live to be 100 years old, I'll never understand why there has to be child abuse in our world, or a place like a child advocacy center has need to be in existence. But on behalf of every tiny face I see at our door, I thank God that there is. The Child Advocacy Center of Lincoln County is a nationally accredited center and is not only a home-like setting for which you've just seen, it's a process in which all of our community has a part to play. That includes you. Law enforcement, social services, the district attorney's office can't do this alone. We need you to be able to keep a watchful eye, make sure that children are not in one-to-one situations, and most of all, support programs just like the Child Advocacy Center that are not only the humane approach to child abuse successful investigations, it's also the financially responsible approach. We are a nonprofit organization who run on grants and donations, and we rely on our community to provide services to the victims that we see at our door each day. Again, I want to take the time to thank you and ask you to please continue to support your local Child Advocacy Center.
Good night, sleep tight, knowing that you've helped a child tonight.
Thank you.